So thank you everyone for joining us for 5 ways to rescue your AR department from the cash flow tightrope. I am Ernie Martin, founder and CEO of Receivable Savvy, and I'm joined by James Seeley. And James, thank you very much for joining us and doing this with me. So greatly appreciate it.
It's a pleasure to be here, Ernie. With technical difficulties aside, but yeah, great to be here with you.
Okay, so what we'll cover today is why suppliers chase payment. And there are 5 things that we've identified that suppliers and supplier organizations can start doing relatively soon. And those include credit analysis and approval. It also includes invoicing, compliance, collections, payment, and early payment. And so let's dive right in. Why suppliers chase payments. And so everything is interconnected in the order to cash, invoice to cash process that contribute to suppliers chasing payments. And so there's a long history of supplier pain points around getting paid, managing cash flow, and really struggling with things that they can do in order to get paid sooner. Okay. Let's see, start my video. There you go. It starts with improper client engagement and setup. And so every supplier organization loves to get new clients, but there's a process and a way to actually onboard clients. And every client is not a great client, or every potential client is not a great client. There are also inefficient invoice creation, delivery, and confirmation. So when submitting invoices to suppliers, there's a right way, or to customers, there's a right way to do it and a not so right way to do it. There are also inconsistent customer approval and payment processes. So we all like to get paid by our customers, but are there better ways to get paid by customers so you're not chasing payments and you're not waiting a long time? There are also inefficient AR collections processes. So that process when the invoice is actually submitted and hopefully it's paid to term, what do suppliers do to follow up with customers to make sure that they actually are being paid? There are also outdated payment and receipt capabilities. So some suppliers prefer ACH, bank to bank, electronic. Some suppliers actually still get paid via paper check, and that's more common typically in the US and the UK, but it still exists. And there's uncertainty of payment options available, whether it's getting paid directly to term or whether it's taking early payment. And so let's look at a couple of slides here and a couple of charts that start to provide information around why suppliers chase payments. And so we've got in 2015, Receivable Savvy did a study. When submitting invoices to your customers, what issues are most important to your customer or to your company? Getting paid faster was the most important issue for suppliers submitting invoices at 83%. And so that's followed by reducing problems and exceptions by 75%, getting the invoice delivered faster at 73%. When we go to our 2017 study, we also see that getting paid faster, a whopping 90% of suppliers thought that that was the most important thing. Again, that's followed by getting the invoices delivered faster and then confirming our customer received the invoice at 78%. Today, 39% of middle market companies indicate it takes them longer to get paid today compared to 2019. And so in a post-pandemic world, some suppliers are noticing that it's taking their customers longer. And that can be attributed to some customers struggling after the pandemic, some customers going out of business, and then some customers just basically changing their terms from, say, 30, 45 days to 60, 90 days or beyond in order to survive in a post-pandemic world. So let's look at the first thing, credit analysis and approval. Some of the challenges are credit analysis is critical to the front end customer engagement. Again, every potential customer looks like they're great on the outside, but once you start digging into their financials, are they financially stable? Do they have Do they have growth prospects? Are they doing well financially? And what do credit companies say about them, whether it's Moody's or Experian? What's the rating that they'll get? And so that's something that supplier organizations really have to do. But a number of suppliers have no organizational credit policy, and they lack a credit department mission and goals. And so they struggle ultimately with managing DSO. Some of the solutions include creating a credit policy, creating department mission and goals, analysis of payables per customer. And so that has to be and should be coordinated with sales, marketing, and your accounts receivable teams to ensure consistent efforts. I've spoken with a number of suppliers where the credit and analysis team wants to move with caution with a particular client or a prospect, but the sales team wants the deal closed yesterday. And so it's important that teamwork exists and that these organizations, these stakeholders, and these individuals within the organizations actually work closely together. And so in terms of the solutions, one of the things that we have and that we'll share with the participants on this call is our white paper, Best Practice Insight, Credit and Collections. And it really walks organizations through how to create a credit policy for their company. And so it provides a credit policy description, establishing credit departments, missions and goals, determining credit evaluation process, establishing terms of sale, and much, much more. Now, let's move to invoice delivery and compliance. And so, James, walk us through this and why this is critically important to supplier organizations.
Thanks, Ernie. Yeah, so going back to what you were just saying, where suppliers chasing payments because they need to get their invoice delivered faster and need to reduce problems or exceptions are some of the key parts I want to focus on in the next little part of this presentation. Because fundamentally, the work that you do as a business is what you should be focusing on. Getting your invoice processed shouldn't be a barrier to being paid. And we know there are lots of issues and barriers throughout that processing. So making sure we've got the right information on the invoice, getting efficiently and effectively to the right part of an AP process is just going to increase the chances of you getting paid on time and even being paid earlier. So how we reduce issues around the content of the invoice and the delivery mechanism is a bit one to focus on. So if we move on to the next slide, we can see around how the invoice delivery methods have changed. And I mean, this is one of your slides. If you want to just touch on this and I can take it back afterwards.
Sure, absolutely. So in our perception study from 2015, 2017, and 2021, we show that, and we asked suppliers, what methods of invoice submission does your company use? And so we see in 2015, 70%, 75% are paper and email. Surprisingly, fax is at 68%, which, in this day and age, even a number of years ago, that's still surprising. And so we also see in 2017, email, paper, still in the upper 70%. And that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the volume. That just simply means that these are the number of suppliers or the percentage of suppliers that responded that still use these methods. So again, paper and email is still pretty prevalent. And you go to 2021, paper, email, again, leads the pack. And we also have other things such as fax, portal created by the customer, portal created by the supplier company, et cetera. And so that is critically important. And so
And what we're seeing is there as well is a significant increase on electronic transfer. And that's obviously areas that we are particularly keen on focusing on and helping suppliers support in their processes. So if we, sorry, I'm going to interrupt you, go on, you can go back on the next slide.
Okay.
Then we can look at what the average invoice flow is. So as suppliers send it through, it takes on average 15 to 28 days to complete that total print, finish, post, sort, prepare, scan, input, archive processes. Now, even if it's being sent via email, then what you've got is predominantly lots of those processes remaining to be done on the AP side. So the processes for the AP on the receiving it, whether it's slightly quicker via email than via post, you're saving a couple of days, but it's still not electronic data. You still have a responsibility in a team to interpret the data. And there are some improvements continuing around OCR, AI, RPA to help improve some of those accuracies, but there's still a key responsibility of the A team to interpret and process that data. So what do we do to help provide and solve these problems? To make sure, again, going back to that number one problem for suppliers, which is getting their invoices delivered faster and more effectively, is, and if you can go on, then we have invoice delivery, which we look at as being electronic. And because we're delivering it end to end, an electronic file, we're providing you as suppliers and AR departments and teams an absolute assurance of knowing the invoice has been reached to the customer. You're sending invoices out via email, maybe they bounce, maybe they go to the right person or not. Person's maybe on holiday, going through post, again, no confirmation it's been actually delivered to the end point. So by delivering it electronically, you're not only gaining that assurance, you're also saving time and effort about worrying about whether your invoice has been delivered. And because you don't have to worry about it, you're also saving time and resources on chasing those invoices as well. So that surety of knowing it's been delivered to the right place, to the right part of the right process, means it's far more likely to be paid on time. If I'm sat there in an AP department and if I never receive your invoice, then I don't know, I can't pay it because it's not there. If the invoice matches what was ordered and what was delivered, it's going to vastly increase the chance of it being paid. So by an electronic file invoice delivery service, which we've been doing at Tungsten for a long time, between a significant amount of suppliers and a significant amount of buyers, we know that it provides that assurance to suppliers that their invoices are being delivered to the right place and increasing their chances of being processed and effectively and efficiently by the AP department, which is going to reduce the DSO and increase their chance of being paid on time. As part of that, not only is there the assurance of the invoice delivery, but also we look to check the invoice for a number of items around compliance. So as we take invoice data through from suppliers, we look at it on a number of different levels. So those are involved in global invoicing. You'll be very painfully aware of the ever-changing world of country compliance and country mandates changing. And I don't really want to talk for a long period about that today, because those who are familiar with changes in Mexico, Italy, forthcoming changes in Poland and France know that there is a significant amount of effort and a significant amount of changes predominantly being placed on suppliers to support continuous transaction controls. So what we do as a business is when we're receiving invoices, we're checking it to make sure it is fiscally compliant. But we can also check those invoices that match a buyer-specific processes, which means that at the point that it's being delivered to your customers, that that the invoice is compliant for tax reasons and is compliant with the customer's processes, which again is just going to increase the chance of it being paid on time or even paid early. And if it doesn't comply with those, then we will reject it. So we're stopping bad data getting through, because we kind of believe it's better for you to know that your invoice isn't going to be processed on the day it is sent rather than the day it is due, that it's going to be successfully passed through a government gateway, and all of that will increase the chances of a straight-through processing part from a buyer perspective. And it means that if there are issues, it allows you to, as they say, to fail fast and fix. You know that's an issue on day one rather than on day 30, 60 or 90. So from an updated flow point of view, then what we can see is that rather than it taking 15 to 28 days, actually, it can take about 20 minutes for us to validate and deliver the data to your customers. And that's probably one of the main reasons we think that in the most recent perceptions analytics surveys that we got given a couple of awards, which were for the most effective at reducing DSO and for providing the highest overall value for invoice submission. We had recently one of our customers come back to us and say, they work with a number of, one of our supplier customers who work with a number of buyers on our network, that says on average that the invoices they send through the network get processed first time through at about a rate of 98%.
And James, let me insert here just before we leave this slide. Just wanting to reiterate that the awards we provided in that where we recognize Tungsten Network most effective at reducing DSO, providing the highest overall value for invoice submission, is not selected by us. And so we do these studies with real supplier organizations, large, medium, and small, and they tell us which organizations, which solution providers perform the best in certain categories. And so unbiased information, unbiased feedback. We don't tip the scale. We don't put our thumb on the scale at all. So this is real suppliers saying that Tungsten Network was most effective at reducing DSO and providing the highest overall value for invoice submission. So I wanted to make that point, just in case there was some thinking that we want Tungsten to win, so we put our thumb on the scale. Certainly not the case at all.
No, thanks, Ernie. I mean, and it's great for us to understand and hear that from a wide range of our customers who are pleased about what we're doing and the services we provide them to help make their businesses more effective and more efficient.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think you started, let's see. Actually, let's go to the third part, ineffective collections practices. And so for supplier organizations, regardless of size, going to the customer and chasing payments, in essence, putting into place an effective collections process, sometimes there's a fear of customer backlash. Well, I don't want to call my customer too often, or they're going to get sick of me, et cetera. If the invoice has been submitted for work that's been done or a product that's been delivered, then that's a financial contract. So suppliers have every right to circle back with their customers and ask for payment. And there are right ways to do that, and there are, again, not so right ways to do it. But suppliers struggle with the fear of customer backlash. They also struggle with no procedures around effective collections processes, as well as having an inconsistent cash flow, and that hinders funding of the operation. So if a supplier has other customers where they need to fulfill an order, but a previous customer is still not paid, then that sort of puts the supplier between a rock and a hard place to some degree. So it does have a ripple effect. And looking at some additional studies that we've done with our perceptions analytics surveys, we asked, what is your company doing about consistently late paying customers in 2015 and 2017? The majority say that they're calling customers more often. And again, there's a time and a place for these things to occur. So calling customers more often, we wouldn't say that suppliers should never do that, but are there other options that suppliers could look at in order to expedite customer payment? We also received feedback, that suppliers are not taking orders from late paying customers, implementing late payment fees, implementing a cash on delivery policy. And that's basically the same from 2015 to 2017. And so today, in a Business News Daily article, and these articles are all over the place. So you can tap into Google and ask, what should suppliers do to have late paying customers actually pay their invoices? You'll see recommendations such as discuss all costs and payment terms before you begin a project, which that dovetails into the credit analysis process that we talked about before. Suppliers can also bill for upfront work, and sometimes some suppliers request a deposit. You can also send invoices right away, which again, that connects back to, James, what you were saying regarding the best practices around using electronic invoicing and how some of these things actually get the invoice to the supplier much, much faster. And so we also see that be persistent with late paying customers, call them, keep calling them. That's what it says, calling customers more often and charging late fees. So some of the solutions: enforce the credit policy. And this is why companies need one. So everyone, including a sales and accounting management, must enforce the credit policy for late payments. Expediting payments, you can always change the payment terms. Customers don't always necessarily lead the charge there. Suppliers also have some leverage to share with customers, hey, our payment terms are this. Our payment terms where we want to get paid per our invoices that are submitted are 30 days or 45 days. And so sometimes customers will say, well, our payment terms are 90 days. And so that's worth negotiating. And communication is critically important. It's very important to make sure that you're communicating with your customer, because that's critically important. So communicating with the customer is very important. And you can automate this where practical. Tungsten actually has a network invoice status. And so, James, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, there's two areas here that I'd just like to touch on. Firstly is actually, and if you just go back one, and I'll come on to invoice status as in a second, but also we have a part of the suite of products and services we provide is part of our total AR suite is a collections module. Now, what that functionality has is the ability to automate chase paths. So you can set up an automated reminder to go to customers before the invoice is due, as a friendly email going, hey, invoice is due in 3 days' time. And then also a set of letters, via email or electronically to the customer to actually remind them after the invoice due date to kind of help that chasing process, and also to put in reminders for calls around those letters as well, so that effectively you can try and automate and structure that process. I mean, you may well have a customer that you kind of decide or understand that perhaps they pay late, but they're always paying 2 or 3 days late. So actually, once you've got that an idea, you can actually set up a chase path around them, which is just a little prompter and a little reminder. And then also you probably have customers who are potentially slightly more tardy on their payment terms, and actually be able to set up a far more aggressive set of chasing elements around that, so that you see, nobody really wants to get into a legal or dunning process, but you have a clear set of sets, activities and audit around those, which is then predominantly automated, so that what you then can do as a business is make sure your time and effort are focused on probably more problematic customers to drive and improve that relationship and that payment process with them, rather than those which also need a slight little prompt to that as well. Yeah. So that's an area of functionality we had, just again to, picking up the phone is a great thing to do, have a conversation with people. But if you've got, it's the control over it and the repetitive nature of it as well, to make sure that you're calling the right people at the right time, and it's done in a structured way as well. In terms of the invoice status service, there's a couple of parts I think it's useful for us to touch on this. I think I've got an example of it on the next slide, where this is typically where we initiated this with work with buyers or AP customers on the Tungsten Network, where they can send us an update of what's going on with the invoice in their system. So what we're looking to do is increase visibility and reduce effort on the supply side as well. So GlasscoSmithKline, one of our customers, implemented this invoice status service and saw a reduction in over 60% of calls being made into them. So that's not just 60% of calls that they're not receiving, that's also 60% less calls that the suppliers are making as well.
Right.
And chances are that's not one call per supplier, that's multiple calls. So being able to have an update back into a system that people can self-serve, or actually be federated back to them by a report as well, that can look at two areas, one of which is like a transaction state, to know that an invoice has been delivered, it's been accepted, And actually then, with the appropriate information being available from the right government gateway or the right customer or the right third party, that actually there's been the invoice has been paid, or actually even more importantly, has been rejected. So if there's a part where there is a payment process where the invoice isn't going to be paid, then again, you're better having visibility of that sooner rather than understanding 3 days or 10 days after the payment due date that it was rejected for payment, whereas actually you can get in contact with the customer sooner ahead of the due date because you know it's going to be rejected. And we work with a couple of customers who say that's so invaluable for them because then they're not calling just to ask about the 20 or 100 invoices that are that week out for processing with a specific customer. They're calling about the two which there is a dispute or an issue with. So it's reducing their effort, their time, as well as their customers' time, and actually it gets to use that information to improve both sets of processes with the supplier and the buyer to work more effectively together to make sure the right data is being provided in order to be processed through. Sorry, Annie.
Yep, absolutely. And James, no one likes to make calls or receive calls. So suppliers, even though they do it, chasing late payments, they don't like to do it. And customers don't like to receive phone calls because it's extremely inefficient. So a solution like Invoice Status really comes into play to help alleviate something that neither side likes to really do. And so the fourth piece, payment. The challenges are suppliers have not established or they're not communicating sustainable payment terms. And so for suppliers that may be facing 90-day terms, and that's an extreme, for a number of supplier organizations, it's not sustainable. And so it's important that suppliers find efficient payment methods and not rely on inefficient payment methods. The longer it takes to get paid, the less your money is worth. So with inflation being between 6.5% to 7% here in the US as well as in the UK, if 90 days go by, we're talking the degradation of your dollar or your pound. And so it's important to get that payment paid as quickly as possible. Ideally, if you can get it paid in 30 days or less, that's always the ideal. Some supplier organizations have payment upon receipt, so their payment terms are only a few days. But the cost of money is critical, especially in this day and age with this economy. And so we go back to our perceptions analytics study. How does your company currently receive payment from customers? And then how would they like to be paid by customers? They currently, in 2015, show that 83% received paper check, 71% received ACH, and this is primarily a US-focused study. And these pieces are primarily from suppliers in the US. And then there are also credit card, P-card from customers. There are also other answers, but we wanted to focus on the top three. And then when we asked, how would you prefer to be paid? Electronically, and electronic payments carry the day over paper check. I know the UK and Europe is further ahead than the US in terms of facilitating electronic payments and not accepting checks. And that's from a B2B standpoint as well as from a personal or consumer standpoint. The US still loves checks for whatever reason. And so that's critically important that suppliers prefer electronic payment, whether it's ACH, whether it's bank to bank in the UK or Europe. Same thing in 2017. These numbers really haven't changed. Most are currently receiving paper checks, 87%. And then we look at how they would prefer to be paid. Again, the vast majority of them prefer electronic payment. So some of the solutions we can look at is setting your customers up to pay you electronically. Payment is not necessarily always driven by the customer. Suppliers can leverage their relationships with customers and actually put into place methods where the customer can pay them electronically. And sometimes it could be a combination of several methods, as long as electronic payment methods have a place and a role to play in getting paid, because that expedites payment. And so it can include ACH, bank to bank in the UK and Europe, virtual card, Swift wire transfers, digital payment platforms, which although some of the percentages and the APRs are pretty high, that does expedite payment. So it's important to have a consistency of the process in which you receive payment. Therefore, you can have some predictability in when you're going to get paid by your customer. So let's look at the final piece, early payment. And so some of the challenges, not being sure which methods are best or even available for early payment. Sometimes it's your customer that offers it. Sometimes it's a third party. Sometimes it's something completely different. And sometimes it's a combination of the two. There's also sometimes no strategy regarding which payments to take early. Should you take all? Should you take none? Should you take some? And so there's not the full accounting for the cost of money as we identified in some of the previous slides, especially with the economy the way it is now and inflation on the rise. It may be prudent for a number of suppliers to take selective early payment on some supplier invoices. And so some of the solutions, the straight early payment discount, the 210 net 30, supply chain financing is available sometimes, third party, sometimes through your customer. Same thing with dynamic discounting, factoring, even though it's been around for a lot longer than a lot of the fintech companies, it's still popular with a lot of suppliers. And a lot of those factoring opportunities and solutions that are in place are based on relationships. So suppliers that use factoring have used factoring with the same company for a long time. There's also lines of credit, asset-based lending. If you've got a line of credit and an invoice is slow in being paid, you can always tap into that line of credit. The downside, of course, is you are liable for that loan. And there's no guarantee that the customer will actually pay in some cases. So if that's the case, suppliers have to eat that loan. And so it's important to investigate what works best as a business. And remember, you can use it selectively. And James, do you want to chime in here regarding the early payment options and sort of what Tungsten may have in the works?
Sure. So yeah, we have a partner that we work with that offers supply chain finance. We also ran a survey actually just a couple of weeks ago with suppliers, and the response to that was that 80% of the suppliers that answered the survey don't use supply chain finance, they would like the opportunity to. And I think typically that's because supply chain finance programs tend to focus on sort of strategic, higher value, higher volume customers when very predominantly bank led. So what we've done is entered into a program with a partner, Albion, who've been doing supply chain finance for a long time and are really well established and really well known in the domain, to be able to extend that offering down the value chain as well. So it's not just the high volume, high value suppliers that have access to that as a way of increasing their liquidity, but also to a much wider range of SMEs as well. And I think it's fair to say that we're also investigating other opportunities for suppliers, customers who are using the network to increase their liquidity and also to get paid early as well. I mean, going back to one of your questions of how do people want to be paid? The answer is normally now.
Right. Exactly.
I mean, consistency of processes, I think, from a supplier's perspective, really important, because you have different. If you've got cash coming in through different channels, potentially that becomes a processing issue of going, I've got this one to do with this one over here, and this one is doing this one over here, and how do I reconcile this one against that one? So having a couple of options is probably for an average company better than having parts of every single option. And I think I really agree with what you say about, remember, to use it selectively. So you probably don't want to have in early payment across every single invoice that you're processing, but to be able to use it where it actually adds benefit to you as a business to help improve how you can deliver your own OKRs and KPIs to increase your revenue and increase your business percentage as well.
Right. Exactly. Thank you for that. James. So in terms of what supplier organizations can do, Receivable Savvy created a while ago the definitive guide for early invoice payment. And what we included in here is really the basics of early invoice payment. What are today's options? Who actually makes that decision inside the organization as to when to take early payment on which invoices, and knowing, when and how to do it. And there are a number of FAQs as well as a number of other pieces of information that are helpful. And so we'll also share this with the attendees and those who registered for this webinar after the webinar. So we'll share this white paper as well as the other white paper in terms of creating a credit analysis process for your organization. And so what can suppliers do today? So a recap is implement a robust credit analysis and approval process for your organization. And that's critical and that's key before engaging with any customer. Use electronic invoicing to confirm delivery and to also speed payment. And as James, as you mentioned, that process that took days really only takes as little as 20 minutes now. So significant impact on your organization's DSO, just on the front end. Ensure invoicing procedures are compliant. And so again, James, you mentioned the importance of that. And whether you're in the US, whether you're in the UK, whether you're in Europe, whether you're in any other country, Tungsten has the capability to ensure that your invoices are compliant as they go through to your customer.
Yeah. Sorry, I was going to say, yeah, it's
Yes.
Again, it's much more likely to get paid if it's right. If there are issues on it, it's more unlikely. Sorry.
Absolutely. And so also number 4, install effective collections process. And so again, a lot of suppliers call customers over and over again, but there are other things that you can do beforehand to make sure that the reduction in calls is what you really want to focus on, while also ensuring that you get paid on time and to term. And then also getting paid electronically, consider early payment solutions. And so getting paid electronically sometimes helps you to facilitate early payment, whether it's supply chain financing, dynamic discounting, whether it's through your customer or whether it's through a third party. And so those are the 5 things that suppliers can start doing today in order to get paid faster and to stop chasing payments from their customers. So with that said, are there any questions? And we will stop sharing. And if there are any questions, we'll let folks either raise their hand. If you're familiar with raising your hand on LinkedIn, on Zoom, then there's a reaction button either at the bottom of your screen, or if you're on your phone, somewhere at the bottom of your phone. Any questions? Yes, James?
I would say, so, sometimes what we kind of get asked about is, is an electronic invoicing for the benefit of buyers?
Mm-hmm.
And, one of the things is that we try and, we know and convinced about is actually it's not a zero-sum game.
Right.
So in terms of, there's definitely benefits on both sides for suppliers and for buyers for e-invoicing.
Right.
In terms of being, adding value to you as a supplier to make sure you can get your invoices paid more effectively and efficiently is as important as it is for a buyer to reduce their resource and efforts for straight through processing.
Yep.
Yeah, it's definitely not a zero-sum game. It's definitely a mutually beneficial thing to be doing.
Absolutely. And that's an excellent question. And so we've got a question from Sybil. Let's see if we can.
Good morning, everyone. My question is it more effective to call the customer instead of emailing them the invoice?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So thanks for asking that. And so some suppliers do a combination of several things. Sometimes they call, sometimes they send an email, and sometimes it's based on your relationship with your customer. If you've got a really good relationship with your customer, oftentimes making a phone call is as simple as picking up the phone, just having a short 1-2 minute conversation around, the invoice is late. Just wanted to touch base. I don't know whether it's fallen through the cracks, but just wanted to, send a gentle reminder by making a quick phone call. If the relationship is not necessarily as strong, sometimes sending an email, a nicely written email, because you want to maintain the relationship with the customer. So if an invoice is late, maybe a couple of days past term, sending a friendly email is oftentimes very helpful for suppliers. So it depends on the relationship. If you've got a good one, sometimes a single phone call is all it takes, not necessarily calling over and over and over again. Sometimes, depending on your relationship, an email is nice and is better to actually submit to your customer. And again, it should be nicely written, and it should be encouraging in terms of, trying to get them to actually bring attention to the late invoice. So I hope that helps. So we've got a question from Richard. There you go. Richard?
Yes, hi. So my question was, would you recommend offering the discounts that you mentioned earlier, like 2% or something in that region, if you're a much smaller business? Because that's where I work, and we've only recently tried payment with an individual on that kind of basis, and it hasn't worked out for us. And we're thinking, would that be something to go along with other customers, or do you think we'll just be abused by the fact that we are that small and can't offer that to everyone?
Yeah, so if I understand your question correctly, you're asking, is it a good idea to do something like 210 net 30, offer a discount of maybe 2% if your customer pays in 5 or 10 days or something to that effect? Is that the question?
Yeah, so really it's the trade-off between cash flow immediacy and being able to recoup the whole amount, because our margins are so small due to our size.
Right. Yeah, so thank you for that question. It's an excellent question. And a number of suppliers have that question also. So should you do it on the front end, or, and you didn't ask this per se, but the obvious next question is, or can you do it, on the tail end in terms of, leveraging factoring company, supply chain financing, or what have you. So the answer is very similar to what James mentioned earlier a few slides ago, in that using certain invoices to get paid early selectively. And so if you've got a particular client where, or clients where you would love to get that payment sooner, doing a straight discount offer in your terms is certainly worth doing. And so, but there are risks involved with that. And so one of the risks that suppliers run into is they will offer those terms. And so if, let's say you've got an invoice that's due, that's $100. And so you're offering your customer to pay $98 if they pay that invoice in 10 days. Oftentimes, depending on what's in place, if the process in place with your customer is very loose, then oftentimes some customers, not all, some customers will pay to term, but still take the discount. Okay, so that's the risk you run in offering straight discount terms up front. Some customers will honor that, but I've read and come across a number of situations with other suppliers where some customers will not honor that. And it's not necessarily because customers are trying to necessarily cheat you, but depending on how many invoices are coming in, and the process and the structure in which that invoice is being submitted, approved, and paid, sometimes customers will see, oh, well, here's the total. It's $98 and not $100. And the notion that it should be paid early falls through the cracks. So they'll pay the $98 at 30 days. So, it's not helpful to you when that happens. And so depending on the relationship you have with your customer, if it's a good relationship and they're trustworthy and it's mutually beneficial, then it's worth trying. If it's a customer where there's some uncertainty around that, then it's worth looking into factor, dynamic discounting, supply chain financing, because you're going to get the same thing. But with those options, there's at least some structure and some form of guarantee in the process to make sure that you do get paid early, and that if the discount is offered, you'll get paid early and not to term. So,
yeah, I think agreeing completely there with Ernie as well, but also it's going back to the first point from our presentation today, which is the credit analysis and approval process. So if you want to put it in as a process, make sure it's a process that gets adhered to, so that people, as I say, don't take advantage of your potential goodwill for doing it. Or if they, it does, well, then you say, right, we're not offering that to you again. Okay. So, I think it's try it definitely with a customer you have a better relationship with to begin with.
Yep.
Right.
Somebody that's friendly, again, going back to can you pick up the phone and have a conversation with them about it, and actually have that factored into that credit and approval process as well.
Okay, great. So sounds like it's an area for experimentation. So thank you both very much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for your question, Richard. So it looks like Sybil has another question.
Yes. So my other question is, so I work for a company where it's not an agency, but it's not a collection agency. So my job is to really collect, payments from customers. And there are times where customers we do not charge late fees. So there are customers that are paying or actually don't want to pay after 200 days past, to 300, 400, even up to 2 years. And sometimes it gets so frustrating because it's just pay us. So is it ever okay to be nasty or be firm, like this is unfair?
Tony, I might let you take that one.
Okay, so just to be on the safe side, especially because this is being recorded, it's never okay to be nasty with customers. Okay, and so with that said, so if we're looking at, and by the way, you said you work for an organization that is or is not a collections agency.
It's not a collection agency.
But your organization is in the business of collecting past.
Yes. So
yes,
exactly. So I work in the AR department. So my job is to send invoices, and then we get paid, and the customer pays us.
Right. And so you've got a number of options. And again, going back to the credit analysis, doing the work beforehand in terms of, is your organization engaging with customers that are financially stable, that have a history of paying their invoices on time or early, even better? With those things not in place, then obviously you run the risk of falling into what you just described, 200 days, 2 years later. And so there are other things you have at your disposal. And so this is not my area of expertise in terms of litigation or taking a legal stance with past due invoices where it's beyond, it's half a year to a year or 2 years. But once you get past the reaching out to your customers, asking for payment, and trying to negotiate some kind of settlement, because a number of suppliers either write those invoices off as a loss, or they will accept pennies on the dollar. Okay, and so assuming you've gone through all of those processes and all of those steps, if there's still nothing, and you're not getting any satisfaction from your customer, then I think it's up to your organization as to whether or not they want to take any legal steps after 6 months to a year. And so every situation is different, and I don't think there's a umbrella answer that covers every specific situation because they are so different. But
I think that's so. There's two kind of parts here. I think one is stopping it happening again in the future.
Yep.
So making sure that there are things that either go into the invoice around potentially about late payment fees, or in the contract or purchase orders, or however you're working with those customers, to try and mitigate that from the future and just be clear about it, about what the penalties are for late payments. I think there are actually some countries which have some statutory late payment fees. To be honest, I forget which ones do, but there is definitely some legal background to that as well, which obviously doesn't help you with chasing the ones which are already late that you don't have a contractual back point for. I think that's where Ernie's saying about negotiated settlements and their things can help as well. But I think there's kind of making sure the situation doesn't get worse by as we all do, try and learn by our mistakes and try and put things into contracts and into terms and conditions to make sure or it doesn't happen again, or to mitigate that risk as much as we can do. Sorry, Ernie.
No, thank you for adding that color to it. So does that, I don't know if we answered your question.
The tricky part is that I actually work with government customers. It's not, regular customers, regular people. Those are customers that actually, government customers that have the money, they have purchase orders, they have, they're supposed to spend the money, but we're just not getting it for whatever reason.
Right. Yeah, that's as we used to say, that's a sticky wicket. And so there should be, in your organization, are there departments or individuals that are, or is it you that are tasked with, depending on how long a invoice goes, they are tasked with, being deployed or going into action to make sure that that's resolved?
It's me.
Okay. All right. And so, well, maybe this is something we can discuss offline also, because I'd be interested in learning more about your situation. So if you're open to connecting after maybe the next day or two, and we can talk about it a little more in detail, if you're open to that.
Okay, that'll be great.
Okay. Yeah. And thank you for your question. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Any other questions? And these are excellent questions, by the way.
So I think, we have just run past the hour. We were a little bit late in starting.
Yeah.
I think we're going to make it offer one last question.
Yeah. So a frequent question that we're asked is, who is responsible for ensuring suppliers get paid faster? And so you've got an organization, you've got the CFO, and the CFO obviously for an organization is looking at both the AR and the AP side, but who is responsible? And so the answer really is two answers. One is everyone, and then primarily the CFO or your financial leader. But the financial leader doesn't do it in a vacuum. The financial leader does it with sales, marketing, the credit and collections team. And so it's a group and a team effort, but strategically it's everyone, but also strategically it's the chief financial officer to make sure that things are in place, to make sure that suppliers get paid to term or faster if they choose to. So that's a frequent question that we get asked. And again, the CFO is strategically the person in place to make those things happen. So with that said, thank you everyone for joining us and for being flexible and joining us on Zoom. We'll share this recording with everyone that registered. And thanks again. And we look forward to seeing you the next time. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ellie.
Thank you.